these 6 simple facts for Jesus' resurrection that you can share with anybody. Anybody can do it. We can get it. There's obviously, but this is where the belt analogy comes in. There's different layers and levels to it, right? Like you can do a guillotine as a white belt, but you can do a guillotine as a black belt, and they're still guillotines, but there's different depth and levels to it. So most of us just need to at least get some blues and purple belts, and we're good. And then when the times of testing, temptation, or tribulation come, you're more prepared. You're ready in season out of season.
Man, we're just going to talk about everything, wherever it goes. We're just going to tee this up and talk about all things Ben Shaw, apologetics, Men's Alliance, and Jiu-Jitsu.
Dude, we're big on using the term barbarian ambassador. And like when I found out about you, when Quack showed me your stuff, I was like, this is our guy. An apologist and a black belt jiu-jitsu. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that checks the barbarian and the ambassador.
that vibes. That's so.
Yeah, it's a good combo. I wanted it started because I wanted to be in law enforcement, and so I started training because those guys have to go hands on frequently. So I figured I should know what I'm doing, and so that's kind of how it got started.
Dude, that's so awesome that you did that in preparation. But then we've got law enforcement guys that aren't afforded that opportunity when. On a daily basis, those are guys that need that type of training because they're having to interact, going hands-on with people more often than
every time you put someone in handcuffs, you've got to grab them.
Yeah.
And they don't always comply, and so it's like, okay, well,
I love watching the YouTube videos of cops taking guys down and stuff, and you can tell instantly. You can be like, that cop wrestled in high school, like he's taking him down like a wrestler. Or this guy does jujitsu, or this guy doesn't do anything.
Right.
Right.
More often
or
than
this
not,
guy,
it's that.
this guy played football. He's taking him down like a football player or a wrestler or something. Yeah. Well, like I said, man, we're just excited about connecting with you, about finding like-minded Christian brothers, and looking forward to a conversation. I'm curious, since you brought up you were thinking law enforcement. Tell us, what was the journey to where you are now? This sounds like it wasn't the intended path. How did you get to what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to cleanly answer that.
Give us the dirty version.
Yeah. So Liberty, a lot of it has to do with Liberty, and I went there because they had a hockey team. That was my only reason for going.
You played hockey?
I played hockey at Liberty, so another good sport to play.
Yeah.
And a lot of contact, and I like the speed and physicality of it. But I went to Liberty just because they had a hockey team. It was my 5th college, and I did not care for school. Like, it just
5th
wasn't very interesting for me. But I didn't. But at the same time, I was saved but not discipled. So I was getting tossed and turned by every wind of doctrine. It's pretty. That can lead to some meaninglessness and things like that. So I wrestled with those sorts of things. I always kind of liked martial arts, and I liked law enforcement, and I liked the idea of impartiality and justice and all those sorts of things. So I was like, okay, well, I think law enforcement's a good route to go in, and I wanted to help people. And one guy told me, I did a ride along, and the guy was like, look, get a business degree in case you get hurt so you've got a fallback. I was like, okay, I'll do that. I don't enjoy business very much either, but if that's your advice, that's fine. So I started doing that, but then at Liberty I got to ask questions about God, and I started doing that. I'm like, well, if I want to be law enforcement, I want to help people. I'm just some punk kid from Florida. Like, what do I know? But I know God can help them. So let me learn more about God, because he can help them, because people have really, really big problems and very heavy problems. And so the more I can point them towards God or things like that, then that would be helpful. And so then I got my undergrad in marketing, and then I got a master's in religious studies because I wanted to also understand the different worldviews and what do they teach, how are they different. Again, I'm from Fort Lauderdale, so it's like 4 million people in that county, in Broward County. And everyone's got a different worldview, so I'm trying to understand the major ones and how do we distinguish and differentiate, and how's Christianity set apart. And then I still had some questions, and then I got offered a chance to get a PhD for free. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll keep studying. In the process of this, one of my professors in the master's program, he might have been in the PhD program actually, but I found out he was a law enforcement officer in Atlanta for a long time, and he held like some weightlifting records, so he's a pretty big dude. And then he ended up becoming a pastor and then a teacher at Liberty. His name's Kevin King, and I talked to him one day. I think I was engaged. I might have been married, but I think I was engaged. And my wife and I went to talk to him about being a law enforcement and bringing God to that and what's that look like. And he didn't know me at the time. That was our first kind of time talking. And he's like, unless God writes it for you in the sky, law enforcement may not be the thing for you. Like, because he had been there, he had done that, and he came from kind of a different era. And he's like, look, if you want to go and use your physicality and get into fights and stuff like that, there's the military. There's plenty of opportunity for that there. He's like, but just the way the law enforcement is going, it may not be what you think it's going to be. I was like, okay. It's a bit disappointing, but I listened to him, and my wife's family was praying, I guess, that I wouldn't be law enforcement at the same time. So God opened the door for the PhD, and I just kept asking questions there. I wasn't planning, I wasn't going to be a professor or anything like that. That wasn't on my agenda. I wanted to take what we were learning and apply it. So that's still what we're doing with Core. It's just not with law enforcement.
Tell us about Core Apologetics. Explain this ministry to us.
Yeah, so part of that was because I felt like I had to go get a master's degree and a PhD just to learn Christianity better. You don't find that in the Bible.
No.
That's not...
Do you still feel that way, by the way?
So we're trying to bring all like the core truths of Christianity, the fundamentals that we all need. We're trying to help bring that to equip churches and organizations with those core truths. Did Jesus rise from the dead? How do we know that? Why does it make a difference? Is the Bible reliable? Questions like that. How do you deal with doubts and questions? Those are some of the key things that we discuss. We're also trying to help equip people with those core truths, because there's a lot of believers who are getting asked questions that maybe they haven't been asked before. And so how do you answer them in a simple way? Because I don't want to get a PhD and I don't want to give them some, nerdy answer. I want to give them, what's the basics here? And I use Jiu-Jitsu analogies a lot. Like, you don't have to get a black belt to be saved, right? You just need to have a belt in the game, like committed to it.
You just need to get on the mats.
Yeah, you just got to be willing to get on the mat, right? And be faithful and obedient and those sorts of things. And but we're not supposed to check out our brains either. So we need godly people, and God's equipped us all and given us all different skills and talents. Like in Romans 12, we see that. And we need to apply them. Not everyone's called to be into full-time ministry in the sense of being a pastor, right? Because a lot of business owners are in full-time ministry. They're having business as a ministry or business as missions. Right. But they're not going to go to seminary, and many of them shouldn't. They don't, I want an excellently run business, right? If you're a medical doctor and you're a surgeon, I want you to study where my bones go and, where the stuff goes. So if you have to take something out and put it back, you do it right. But at the same time, if you're going to be a godly person in those disciplines, you've got to have the foundations of Christianity, of knowing not only the hope that you have, but being able to give reasons for the hope that you have. So that's what we're trying to help equip. I like to joke and say, if I'm just a hockey player and I can understand, these 6 simple facts for Jesus' resurrection that you can share with anybody, anybody can do it. We can get it. There's obviously, but this is where the belt analogy comes in. There's different layers and levels to it, right? Like you can do a guillotine as a white belt, but you can do a guillotine as a black belt. And they're still guillotines, but there's different depth and levels to it. So most of us just need to at least get some blues and purple belts, and we're good. And then when the times of testing, temptation, or tribulation come, you're more prepared. You're ready in season out of season.
That's so good. I have used the exact same analogy. I was trying to remember if it was a podcast or an article that I did called "More Brown Belts Needed." So my son was he used to do jiu-jitsu at at a club where the senior instructor there was a brown belt. And it was amazing. The guy, if you don't know anything about jiu-jitsu, you can learn a ton from a brown belt.
Most people stop at blue belt. Like, there's a sharp drop off from blue to purple.
I was going to say, you can learn a ton from a purple belt. But I think that within a lot of communities, jiu-jitsu being one, Christianity being another, that is something that keeps a lot of men on the sideline, is they tell themselves, well, I'm not a black belt, or, well, I don't have a degree, I didn't go to seminary, or whatever. It's like, listen, you don't need that. In fact, what we need in this country is we need more people that are leading and training and representing without the degree, without the pedigree, without the belt. We just need more men getting off the sidelines leading. It doesn't matter what color your belt is. So you're just speaking our language here, and I love the fact that you are making this core, right, accessible to people. Core, and you went over some of those things, right? But really, it sounds like you're distilling down the essentials of Christianity into, like, listen, there's a ton of stuff out there. It could be so overwhelming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. I don't understand these things. I don't get all this. But here's what I know, right? And that's the core, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, we want to help people major on the majors. Like you just said, a lot of people are I'm trying to be a specialist in this very minute topic that nobody knows about. It's like, why? You know, let's focus on majoring on the majors. A lot of people want to, hey, I have to figure out this, this end times issue, or I've got to figure out, this Arminianism, Calvinism issue, or I've got to sort, like, there's all sorts of, let's start with the main thing. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, I'm going to give you the gospel that has the power to save, and this is of first importance. That should be where we want to start, right? It's of first importance, not last importance. It doesn't say, if you want to do it or if you feel like it. This is the key thing. And then he goes on to talk about how Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures. He was buried, and 3 days later he rose again, according to the scriptures, and that he was seen by 3 groups and 3 individuals. And that's important. That's a cue for us to pay attention. This is the baseline, right? This is the main thing we want to do. We want to focus on. And then that should, there's more to it than that, but we've got to start there. And so many people, we've been distracted, myself included, because like I said, I was growing up and I got saved, but for a long time I wasn't discipled. And I saw all those things too, all those questions. And then with the internet, we see all these different competing questions and issues, and which ones are main and which ones are not. Just like jiu-jitsu or martial arts, you see a lot of fake martial arts online. There's a couple good channels that highlight.
That is the funniest stuff. I love watching
If it can happen in martial arts where there's a physical response that you can feel if you're wrong, how much more so is going to happen, in these other areas?
I was just thinking about this yesterday. I was watching one of those videos. Some group that's always showing up on
I think it's McDojo.
McDojo, that's it. And I'm always seeing this, and I was realizing yesterday there is a lot of similarities between that kind of like subculture and some religious subcultures, where it's like you're watching this video of all these people, all these adults following this guy's teaching, and we're all watching this video laughing, but we're also thinking, how on earth did this guy get all these people to play along in this absolute fantasy, right? Where he's just sitting there like nodding his head and people are falling, and you're like, man, there's something there similar. Maybe this is a podcast for a different day about like human psychology or something. But how do you get that group to do that? And how do you get certain Christian subculture groups to follow the craziness of their leader? There's some similarity there for sure.
Yeah, I think so too, and that would be a good podcast in and of itself. Because again, those guys, I've seen the matches where those teachers get so self-deceived, they start believing their own hype, and then they think they can go walk in and compete with someone. It just never ends well.
That is a whole nother layer, right? Where they are so self-deceived. They believe it. And I've seen one of those too. I've seen one of those where this guy, he steps into a ring with a dude that just walks up and just knocks him out.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody's in shock because they were like, I didn't think this guy could be touched. Yeah. But, all right, let me try to get back. I could talk about these videos all day, McDojo. You quoted something earlier from 1 Corinthians.
Yep.
Now, I believe that was a creed you were quoting, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the significance of these creeds and what are they? There's certain things, certain areas in the New Testament that are different from the rest, right? It's like suddenly the author is now quoting a creed. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so in the New Testament, so when people hear the word creeds, they're thinking either of a band, okay, they tell their age, or they're thinking of something like the Apostles' Creed or like the Nicene Creed or something like that.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about oral traditions or oral statements that are preserved in writing in the New Testament itself. And so 1 Corinthians 15, starting at verse 3, is one of the most famous New Testament creeds. And there's a couple dozen creeds within the New Testament. And they go by different names: oral formulas, confessions, confessional statements, oral traditions, yada, yada, yada. But if you think of them like this, they were a type of catechesis that someone would go through to make sure they understand what it is they believe before like getting baptized. That's a good place where someone may use one. Paul specifically says, why 1 Corinthians 15 is such a good example is because Paul specifically says, I delivered to you that which I received. And that's technical language for handing on tradition, like a formalized instructional statement. And then in verse 3, it says that Christ died for our sins, and that, and that, and that. And so those and that statements, those are further indicators that a creed's being passed on. There's some parallelisms in there. There's a Jewish... This isn't like a Christian thing. This isn't some liberty, like, weird thing or anything like that. We're not doing McDojo stuff here. This is across the board. Scholars from all different backgrounds recognize there are these creeds in the New Testament. And then there's a Jewish scholar named Pinchas Lapid. He passed away. But he points out 8 different characteristics in 1 Corinthians 15 that identify this as a creedal statement. So Paul's essentially quoting the early church here. And he says a couple verses later in verse 11, whether I preach it or they, referring to the apostles, so we are preaching the same gospel message. And scholars date Paul's reception, because so if Paul says, I delivered to you, he's talking to the Corinthians, that which I received, well then Paul must have received it at some date.
Right.
So that shows it's even earlier. So you're like, Paul, when did you learn this material? And a lot of scholars go to Galatians 1:18, where Paul says 3 years after his conversion, he meets with James and Peter. He says Peter and James, actually, in that order. And he uses the Greek word hysteresis for meeting or inquiring with Peter. Some say to visit, but the root word of that is where we get our word history. And hysteresis has to do with this idea of getting firsthand experience or firsthand knowledge from. So here Paul is getting to talk with Peter for 15 days, and James is there with him. Famous European scholar Sage Dodd said, we can presume they did more than just talk about the weather, because the entire context of Galatians 1 is the gospel. And then what did Paul say in 1 Corinthians 15? That he's giving them the gospel that he received that has the power to save and is of first importance. So a lot of scholars, Pinchas Lapid would be a Jewish one, Bart Ehrman would be an atheist agnostic scholar. They all date this tradition to the early 30s AD, and particularly at this meeting when Paul met with Peter and James.
That's why I think this is so incredible to hear about, right? Because most of us grow up hearing, that the Gospels were written later, and people mean all different things by later, especially if you go to a secular university and they're telling you, that this stuff was written late, and John was probably written in around 80, 90, and you start hearing this stuff and you're being kind of told that this is late, even though 90 would be early. Yeah, even though, what do you mean by late? 90 is not late.
Let me just jump in real quick. When you compare that late with, say, Alexander the Great, the earliest biographies we have of him are centuries later. Centuries later.
Yeah.
Buddha's are centuries later for his teachings. But yeah, they're late.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like
like
within historical writings, 60 years is fresh, hot off the press. But then you get to these creeds. Now you're talking about scholars dating these creeds. So what I'm hearing you say is these creeds are older, or scholars believe to be they are older than the Gospels.
Right.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
Yeah. And we would say older. I think you mean earlier, because they're closer in time to the events.
Yes, that's what I mean.
They are closer. Yeah, because you could use either language. They are closer in time to the event. So, like you said, the Gospels are typically considered to have been written from, say, the 60s to the 90s. That's all 4 of them, which is still within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. Some scholars date them even earlier than that. A recent book just came out that dates everything pre-70, before 70 AD.
Yeah, because of the temple.
Because of the temple. That's one of his reasons. But Paul's writings are earlier still. They're widely believed to have been written in the 50s. So they would still predate the Gospels. But then this material is even earlier still, going back to the 30s AD. And again, it's widely acknowledged that these creedal statements predate. And there's a number of important creedal statements. 1 Corinthians 15 is just one of them. 1 Corinthians 11 is another, where Paul's talking about the Last Supper. Romans 10:9, from the famous Roman roads, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe with your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.
That one is a creed.
Because he says
I did not know that one,
because it's a confessional statement. So when you read those words confession, those are typically cues and clues that it's an early Christian creed or confession.
How about
that's
that?
actually the name of some of these books that investigate it. Early Christian confessions.
My favorite one is, I believe it's a creed. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is Philippians 2.
Yeah,
the Philippians 2 one. I love that one because I think it so clearly conveys who Jesus was. Right, talking about him taking on human form and being found in appearance as a human. Like, whoa, that's kind of mind blowing. It's not used that kind of language anywhere else. It's like this being, God, took on human form and was found in appearance as a man. I just love the way that's worded. I'm like, that's who Jesus was. Not just a good teacher.
Of that too is that's our example. If the God of the universe does that and then comes to serve, what are we supposed to do?
Wow, man, that's good. So you have. Back to your story of, law enforcement aspirations and business degrees, and then you've got this PhD, and now you've founded this organization, this ministry, Core Apologetics. Your journey into this is taking you all the way to the top. The PhD, you're leading this kind of stuff. You're investigating, you're learning about these creeds, and you're making this stuff known. I would imagine that this is something that for, I would say, just the average kind of nominal Christian believer, this is empowering, this is emboldening to learn.
I certainly hope so. It was for me. Part of my story is like, I didn't know Paul wrote half the New Testament when I came to Liberty. So I didn't know much about anything. That was powerful when I learned that he wrote a number of the New Testament books, and then I was like, oh man, there's a bunch of good evidences here that I didn't even know about or realize, and how encouraging they can be when you're facing trials, temptations, or tribulations, because you can remind yourself of these things. Now, just to you mentioned with Core. So Core was initially founded by a gentleman named Ron Davis, and it was just a doubters ministry. And so Ron and I, we both studied with Dr. Gary Habermas, who's the world's leading expert on Jesus' resurrection. And Ron went to study with him. Habermas is also an expert in dealing with doubt and different issues with doubt. He's got a couple books on doubt. And Ron went to get his dissertation at Liberty just so he could study with Dr. Habermas. And he's talked to about 1,500 doubters in the past several years, just through his ministry. And then after I graduated, I was actually on Ron's dissertation committee, and we were talking. He goes, Ben, I got a crazy idea. Why don't you partner with me, and we can turn Core into something bigger than what it is right now. And that's when we relaunched it about a year and a half ago, where we're trying to take the things at those academic levels in seminary. What are the main things that we need to know and help people focus on? Because there's a lot of good information out there. The challenge is, if you want to go study with someone like a Dr. Gary Habermas right now, all you got to do is get a PhD, enroll to a program, get accepted.
That's all.
Travel to Liberty once a week, like for a whole week, and study with them, right? So we're trying to make it more accessible for people, and it's if there's people who want to dig deeper and go to that black belt level, great. We can point them to seminary. But most of us have families, full-time jobs, and we're serving in our church, but they don't have any training. So how can we equip them more? How can we train them more? And I've taught online. I've taken classes online. I'm sure many people listening have taken classes online, and they know about discussion boards and how exciting those are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Done a lot of those.
Yeah. So, and as a teacher online, I often feel like a moderator, not like a teacher. Like, you can imagine learning jiu-jitsu online, right? Okay. And you never actually have another person to train with, right? Only, like, if you're just watching videos and you never grab somebody else, it's not going to be the same. So one of the things we're trying to do is we have webinars that's live instruction with us. So then you can ask a question, or we can ask you a question like, oh, what was that creed in 1 Corinthians 15? How do we date it there? Do you remember? And then put you on the spot. And now you're getting that first engagement in a kind of more comfortable atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
In jiu-jitsu, as we say, if you can't do it against a willing opponent, you can't do it against a non-willing opponent. So
that's really good. We have a course in Men's Alliance called Carry the Fire, and we do the exact same thing. It's live online, and we put guys on the spot with really tough questions, like, hey, you don't really believe the fairy tales in the Bible, do you? And we just sit there awkwardly while they try to answer or something, with, hey, Christianity might be true for you, but it's not true for me. And then we debrief them on how they did. And
that's awesome.
And then we do it again the next week, and we see the improvement. And I always use the example of either football or jiu-jitsu, in that you cannot learn these things by just reading or watching videos. Like, you're going to have to roll. You're going to have to get tapped out or get hit. And you've got to practice a lot, and in order to get good at these kinds of things. And these conversations are the most important things. So why would we not practice this stuff?
Yeah.
Right? And it sounds like we're very much on the same page here.
Yeah, I think some of that goes to what you were saying at the very beginning, where a lot of guys think, it's very common to think, I'll just have the pastor answer all the questions. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to
I'll just outsource everything to him.
I'm going to outsource my discipleship to my pastor. He's going to take care of it.
How do I become a Christian? Well, let me introduce you to my pastor.
Exactly, right.
So the answer to every question is introduce them to my pastor.
Yeah, and the pastor, I'm sure he loves it. He's like, wait a minute, what have I been talking about every Sunday to you guys, and we're not taking
why don't you guys go do this?
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you about your book. Let's talk a minute about your book, and specifically why this book is so relevant to giving that courage and emboldening Christians with this information that's in here. So your book is it's called Trustworthy, 13 Arguments for the Reliability of the New Testament. Tell us all about this and why Christian men need to be reading this. Hey, men, has money gotten in the way of how God can use you? Let me tell you about Tom Love, certified financial planner with the Main Street Group. Tom Love from Tuckahoe Tribe, a.k.a. Doc, can absolutely get you squared away with your finances. My wife and I use Doc to handle our personal finances, and his team is second to none. Tom is a certified financial planner. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He's been ranked top 40 under 40. He's been ranked number 2 in Richmond Times Dispatch. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal. And make sure you mention Men's Alliance whenever you reach out to Doc. He gives Men's Alliance, Tip of the Spear Ministries, a portion of the proceeds when you invest through him. He's a fee-only fiduciary, which means he doesn't make money unless you make money. So check out Tom Love at the Main Street Group.
Yeah, I mentioned I mentioned Dr. Habermas a moment ago. I've been studying with him for like well over a decade, and he's been putting together his life's work on the resurrection.
Yeah,
and he if you guys aren't
I've heard about this coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
It's not finished yet, right?
Well, three out of the 4 are done, and the fourth one should be out in the fall. And I use this analogy. What Michael Phelps's body is to the water, like he's huge, he's long, he's built for swimming. That's how Habermas's mind is built for like academics. He's got this like lockbox of a memory. It's ridiculous. I don't have that gift. Okay, I can type fast and I can find stuff on my computer quickly. But so I say that to say the first volume just on historical method and evidence was 1,000 pages. So it's big, and that's black belt. Like that's black belt level stuff.
Yeah, this ain't entry level reading.
Yeah. Now there is a great book called The Case for the Resurrection, which is
that's the one I read,
and that's the one that I read as an undergrad, not even knowing much about Paul or anything like that. So that's a great entry level. But as he was writing that, I got asked to speak somewhere with Dr. Habermas. I was like, oh yeah, of course. And I got back, I'm like, oh, what am I going to talk about that can be fruitful for this church? Everything I know about the resurrection, he's taught me, and if he's going to be there, you don't want to hear me, you want to hear him. At least I would. And so I was like, well, I've learned a lot about the Bible, and let me kind of synthesize all these different reliability arguments. And part of that is because, like I said, I didn't know Paul wrote half the New Testament. That was a huge thing. So in 150 pages, I shortened all those 13 arguments into those a short 150-page read, which is about 10 pages a chapter. So it's easy just to get introduced to these things, kind of like what the Case for the Resurrection was for you with the resurrection. That's what this is trying to be for New Testament reliability, because the New Testament is so incredibly important for a number of different reasons. We hear it get attacked, like you just mentioned a moment ago, like how do we know that the Bible is in fact trustworthy and reliable? There's a ton of reasons, and basically each chapter is a dissertation or a subject in and of itself. So it's there to introduce, to give you the bottom line up front. It's like, hey, this is the bottom line. We just mentioned it a moment ago with the New Testament writings. They're written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. If you want to debate whether Mark was written in 65 or 40 AD, that's fine. That's a discussion for a different group of people. But I just wanted to know, was it written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses? Who wrote it? And we get into a number of different topics. But it's really important because then as you're reading, it's designed to be helpful for discipleship, to help, again, as a new reader, like not knowing who Paul was, you understand the Bible better, the New Testament more specifically. And then as you're reading, you'll be able to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation of what you're reading. But then also, for an evangelism component, when you're sharing, you're more equipped to share and have reasons for the hope that you have. So if someone asks you, you're like, no, it's not I don't just believe it for this reason or that reason. I actually have these substantive reasons that we all use every day. And you can approach them and use them. Some of them are historical criteria. Some of them are creeds, like we just mentioned. Some of them are non-Christian sources. How do they corroborate the New Testament? And then each of these adds to this view of the New Testament, which the whole aim is to get people to read their Bibles daily. There's a great study done by the Center for Biblical Engagement, which has it studied 400,000 people who read their Bible just 4 times a week. So even just doing it 4 times a week, they were 200 to 400% more likely to share their faith or to disciple others. So if you want like a hack to sharing your faith, just read your Bible every day, stuff like that. I saw, and this might be the same study. It might have been a different one. I don't know. But I saw one comparing like people who read their Bible once a week and twice a week and 3 times a week. And 4 times a week. I don't know if it's the same one, but there was like very little statistical life change reported from the people who read their Bible once, twice, and even 3 times a week. It was very minimal. And then there was like on the statistic, you know what I'm talking about? It's like
people who read it 4 times a week, there was this like massive
sweet spot.
Yeah, it's like a sweet spot where like that's where life change really happens. It's like, and you can see that. I've read the same thing to be true about working out. You know, they say that like if you work out 3 times a week, there's like some minimal effect. But when you go 4 times a week, it's just everything changes. I don't know. There's something about that, but it totally makes sense for Christians to be reading their Bible. This is something that just it's sad. It's a terrible commentary. It's discouraging. Like, why on earth, if somebody professes to be a Christian, if you're claiming to be a Christian, why on earth are you not reading this regularly? And there's just like this massive problem, and it's totally an American problem, right? Is like we've got so many Bibles in every house sitting around and nobody's reading them, while, you know, meanwhile in China, they're memorizing them and passing around 1 page from the New Testament at a time, and you memorize it and then you pass it off to another family. And it's like, man, so much of our lack of knowledge, lack of boldness is really due to ignorance.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, for me, I didn't understand the Bible, so when I would try to read it, it was so hard to understand what was going on, and part of that goes back to what we were talking earlier. Well, you got to go talk to the pastor. It's like, well, the pastor can't talk to everyone at a church, you know, every moment and fill them in. This is where, you know, Matthew, the Great Commission in Matthew 28, it's not pastors go therefore and make disciples. We're all supposed to do that. So you're going to have kids who are going to ask you questions, and then as the parent, they're coming to you. They don't want to be referred to the pastor. They want to talk to dad. And so,
if your kid comes to you, you had better be the one. At least, even if they don't know the answer, tell them, I don't know. Let's find it together. Let's get a book together.
Outsourcing your discipleship.
Yeah, you can't do that. So you got to be able to. And so part of that, like you said, if you got to go find it together, you go find it together. But then as you go, so this Mark we're reading about in Mark, or not that we're reading about Mark, but Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark, this is John Mark, who was Peter's interpreter. So now we can understand, okay, so this guy traveled with Peter, and he was his translator. Okay, this is great. Now I'm kind of understanding. Oh, it was written around 65 AD. That is within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. Now I'm paying attention a little bit more. I've got a better handle on what's going on now as I'm reading this thing. And so those are the things that can help you start to study and want to read it. You don't feel so lost. You know, I don't know if this is a great analogy, but it'd be like a white belt rolling with a black belt, and the black belt thinks the white belt is another black belt, and they're just going all out on this poor white belt, and they're just tapping him out 100 times, and you're like, white belt's like, what just happened here? Like, am I in the right building? And so it's like, you know, that wouldn't be a great first experience. You want to build and build them up, meet them where they're at, and things like that. So, I don't know. It's something that needs to be done, and we need to be doing it, but we need to be doing it, not just depending on the pastor or the church to do it, because we are the church. So
yes,
that's our role to do. And again, we just need to have the foundation set. Don't worry about the secondary issues or third issues until you have the fundamental ones first.
Man, I've got a question for you. So we're talking a lot about discipleship right now, and in your story, you said that no one had discipled you until you got to Liberty. Who was that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, those guys didn't even know they were discipling me. I just looked up to them and tried to see what they were doing. There's 3 guys that come to mind. Dr. Habermas were 4 guys at least. Dr. Habermas was one of them. Another guy named Dr. Wheeler. Another gentleman named Dr. Morrison, and then one of my business professors, Dr. Young. He was another one. He had a very godly marriage, and I'm like, oh, that's great. Like, and he's the one that first, you should pray about a spouse. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think I should be doing that. And then that's when I started doing those sorts of things. So I just had mentors, and I just came under them, and they probably recognized I was there to get discipled with what they were teaching, but that's kind of how it looked. And again, I had to go to grad school for that. That's a little odd. I don't think most people are going to grad school to get discipled. They're not. They're looking for people at their local church that can sit with them, you know, go to coffee. Maybe they can go roll and then talk about Jesus afterwards. You know, it may look like different things in different communities and the way different churches function, but and it's going to look like that in the home too. You know, the home's going to look different. So, but at Liberty, for me, it was just finding different professors and even now our pastor at our church too. So that's how it was for me. Now I'm an only child, so maybe I'm a little weird. I don't know, but that's how God worked it out for me.
And you mentioned Habermas again. You guys have a connection that's deeper than just him being your teacher and you being an understudy over him with that hockey, right?
Yeah. So he was the very first hockey coach at Liberty. So
no way.
Yeah, he's got a very cool background. So that's how I was first introduced to him. And I was like, hey, that's cool. You're the hockey coach. And then I was like, no big deal. And I was like, what's the hockey coach doing writing this book on the resurrection? Like, what is going on here? And that was the case for the resurrection book I had. And I was like, well, this is crazy. And then I ended up doing my master's thesis on the resurrection, and he came and sat in on that, which was kind of cool.
Was that the historical investigation into the resurrection?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
A nice 100 pages again. Yeah, that's a good. Try not to hit those 1,000-page markers.
And on that one, like we've been talking because we've got a big event in Men's Alliance coming up, our national rally in May, and that's the reason we want to have you on here because you're going to be one of the speakers
I'm looking
there
forward
at
to
that
it, yeah.
event, man. And we talked about this, the resurrection and historical investigation into it. That's a little bit of what you're going to be talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, the resurrection, man, I just mentioned there's 1,000 pages in Habermas's book, but that's just the first volume. There's going to be 4 volumes, and they're all about 1,000 pages. So, that's what's really great about it, though, is you can share it. Habermas will literally talk to middle schoolers to PhD classes. So you can hit it at all the different levels that it's appropriate. And the evidence, why I think it's so great, the minimal facts, why I really enjoy the argument, is most of us already know the facts that he's talking about. I don't think you guys are surprised to know that Jesus died by crucifixion. Right? That's one of the minimal facts. That the disciples had experiences of the risen Jesus. We just talked about that in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 groups and 3 individuals. That Paul converted from being a church persecutor to someone who was willing to suffer and die. Like, those are all things we already know, but we don't realize the fact that they are very, very well evidenced historically, and that they're widely accepted by scholars from all sorts of different backgrounds. There's actually a book by a gentleman named, I think it's David Mishkin, and it is David Mishkin, and it's called Jewish Scholars on Jesus' Resurrection. And he goes through these minimal facts and identifies how throughout this Jewish scholarship, they all accept these minimal facts. So it's really great. So I love having those because at the end of the day, the historical facts don't change, even if my external circumstances do. So those can, again, sustain me in times of tribulation or temptation or trials. They can motivate me and provoke me to good works in a good way, not like in a bad way, like Ephesians 2:10. All right, 1 Corinthians 15:58. Paul just talks about all this evidence for the resurrection and how important it is. And at the very end, he says, be steadfast in your good works, for they're not in vain. So are you doing good works? Are you doing good works to be steadfast in them? Oh, no, I haven't been. Let me get on that. So anyway, yeah, I think I'm looking forward to that. And then we're going to do some jiu-jitsu after, too.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a great one, too. And that's why I like what you guys are doing because, when you get hard workouts, your guard can go down because you're too tired to put on a facade.
That's exactly.
That's
well said. Yeah.
And then
you're too tired to put on a facade. You're real after a workout, man. You're ready to be authentic.
You said your guard can go down. There's no guard pullers in
That's
Men's
true.
Alliance.
That's true.
There's no guard pulling. There's no guard pulling in apologetics.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I just want to talk about this minimal facts argument for a second. If you're listening to this and you don't know what we're talking about, you can
hey, let me do this real quick because what he just said, what he was saying earlier about getting to liberty. So the first time I ever heard minimal facts was when I went through the course he's about to talk about.
Oh, cool.
So same thing, with discipleship and stuff like that, this going through Carry the Fire program that we offer here was the first time I ever heard minimal facts. And then when I started looking up into you to get ready for this interview and stuff like that, finding out that oh wait, that came from
That's
Dr.
where we
Habermas.
got it.
Yeah, I was like, oh,
Yeah, so I took an online resurrection course several years ago, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago or so, from Dr. Habermas, and that's where I had done a little bit of reading about the minimal facts argument, but that's where I really got it from. And I'm a history guy. I've got a history degree, and I think that when you start looking at Christianity from a historical perspective, and you start looking at it from like, this is an event that occurred in the spring of AD 33 that's been well documented by multiple early recorded eyewitnesses, suddenly it changes everything you think, or the way you think about Christianity. And the thing that really captured me about the minimal facts argument is that it doesn't rely on the Bible. It's a good way to talk to somebody who maybe so distrusts anything in the Bible that they're like, I don't care what you show me in the Bible. I think the whole book's corrupted or whatever. It's like, you really don't have to first convince them of the Bible's reliability in order to tell them about Jesus. You could say, well, we don't even need to open the Bible to give you evidence Christianity is true. We can use non-biblical historical references and come up with these 5 facts, or 6 or 7, depending on who you talk to and what their lists are. And then it becomes like this really concrete thing. And I think the big thing I took away from Dr. Habermas was his question at the end of giving the minimal facts. You say, so what is your explanation for these facts?
Do you have a better explanation?
How do you explain these facts? Do you have a better explanation? I would love to hear it, right? I look at these facts and I come to the conclusion that Jesus actually rose from the dead and Christianity is true. If you can look at these facts and come to a different conclusion, I would love to hear about it. And another thing, actually, now that I think about it, another thing I took from Gary Habermas was this realization that anything other than Christianity is some type of a piecemeal conspiracy theory, and that you've got to buy into a conspiracy theory to not believe in the resurrection. Either the disciples stole the body, or the Pharisees stole the body, or
mass hallucination
that went to the wrong grave. Jesus had an identical twin. He didn't really die. He passed out. Like, all these things are conspiracy theories with no supporting evidence. And so you could one could go so far as to say that to not be a Christian is to be a conspiracy theorist. You have to buy into a conspiracy theory to not be a Christian. And all this stuff that I'm learning for the first time in my late 30s, early 40s is when I was learning this. It changed the way I viewed Christianity. It blew the roof off of how I grew up. And I was like, all that stuff you were saying about the creeds and the dating, I was like, why didn't we learn this in Sunday school? This should have been what they were covering in Sunday school, right? Because I've set it, restaurant tables with people before, and they're like, well, the reason I'm not a Christian is, the Bible has, been copied so many times and nobody knows what the originals even said. And I've sat there, or they've said, oh, it's so full of errors and contradictions. And I've sat there with absolutely no clue how to respond to that. And so I just ate my food. and so when we start reading books like yours or Dr. Habermas, we start to realize, man, there's incredible ways to respond to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, and you said so much there too. It's
sorry, I'm caffeinated.
No, it's good. There's a lot of things there to talk about. That's the good thing. It'd be a problem if we didn't have anything to talk about.
I've never had that problem.
We've got to pick. I mean, you mentioned the Sunday school issue. Right now, there's studies showing 52% of teenagers are motivated, not just interested, but motivated to learn about Jesus. But the number one trustworthy source for them is another teenager. So then you're like, oh dear.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. How well equipped are they? So we got to equip them. That's one of the things we're working on doing too. Actually, in our webinars, it's pretty cool because we'll have high school students. We've got a gentleman right now and his son, who's a high school student. Like, they're taking one of our webinars together, and then we've got a heart surgeon and retired people, and everyone, because these are the core things for everybody. But with those questions, actually, the fact that we have so many copies, that's the first chapter of my book. Yeah, we actually do have so many copies. That lets us know that we can be that what we have now, it's trustworthy, that's what the original said. And if you want to find where there's differences, you just look in a Bible, because there's footnotes in virtually every Bible that says this verse may not be in some of the earliest manuscripts, or this one is found in a couple early manuscripts that's in our Bible. So that's already identified for us. If we only had one copy, we'd be like, oh, how do we know that one is the original? The fact that we have a multitude is a great find for that. And what's interesting on the minimal facts, I think that's one of the points too, is alternative theories have failed to account for just the minimal facts, not even if you take a broader approach and pull in additional data. And I remember I had a couple questions for Habermas. I'm like, yeah, but what about this? And he was like, Paul, email me. I'm like, oh, I guess. Because Paul is so hard to account for all those theories you guys just mentioned. Paul's not susceptible to hallucinations. Paul's not part of the conspiracy theory. Paul probably thought the disciples stole the body. So he's already an out, he is difficult to explain. So is James.
Yeah, Paul and James.
Yeah, those are different. You mentioned non-Christian sources that discuss the Bible. There's a chapter in there, and I think I only talk about 2 or 3. And there's a multitude of non-Christian sources that corroborate what we find in the New Testament. So, for example, if Tacitus, who is a Roman historian, he does mention that Jesus died under Pilate. It'd be a lot different if Tacitus was like, yeah, Jesus died as a revolutionary in Greece. It would be we'd be going, whoa, what's going on? Okay, now we've got a question. But we see the core truths affirmed in these non-Christian sources. Yeah. And then even when using the minimal facts, because we will appeal to things like 1 Corinthians 15, Galatians, we treat the Bible as any other historical source, and the Bible is a collection of writings. Yeah. Right? So the fact that we put them together doesn't change the fact that Paul's letter is not marked. They're separate things. But it's a really good response to this is if someone's still oh, but it's still in the Bible. It's okay, let me ask you a question. If you were an American history professor, would you not use George Washington's writings when you're discussing the Revolutionary War or the founding of America? You'd be fired if you didn't, right? If you're not using George Washington's writings, that would be a big issue. Of course we want his writings. He was in the wars. He's our first president. We want to know what he said, what he thought, etc. And why would we not do the same when it comes to the New Testament? Why would we not do the same when it comes to Christianity and Jesus? And so what's interesting is that's not a conservative, again, I like the argument, but Bart Ehrman, who's an atheist agnostic, he's the one that makes the argument in defense of the Bible, even though he thinks it's untrustworthy at points, or he doesn't believe it at different points, like the miracles, for example. But he still goes, yeah, it's the best source we have and the best source we should be using. So, I think if you want to know about Jesus, that's where you're going to go.
Culturally, we've got just massive biblical illiteracy. I don't think most people even know what the Bible is anymore. They don't understand that it's a small library of 66 books written over the span of 1,500 years or so, and it's a collection, right? So it's very interesting. I would have loved to have lived in a historical period before they bound it all up in one leather codex and put Holy Bible on the front. If you collective it, it's easier to shoot it down. It's easier to destroy something that's bundled together. And I think almost the unbundling of it is a fruitful exercise, because it's harder to destroy it when you realize, this is a letter that Paul wrote to a church in Ephesus. This is a biography that Mark wrote based on, what Peter told him. This is what James wrote. It's you start to realize when you unbundle it that this is a massive pile of writings, of accounts, of witnesses to this thing. And I almost wonder from a historical perspective if we backed ourselves into a corner by binding it all up, and now people are like, oh, I just dismiss it. That's the Christian Bible. It's like, no, you got to understand from a historical perspective, this is like a treasure trove of historical documents. We've just made it easy for everyone to access.
Yeah. And it's not. Here's reasons. So there's a chapter too in my book on the development of the canon, and it's not our fault they collected the best sources. Like, we're not going to fault them. We shouldn't fault them for that. And we mentioned a moment ago that Paul, like in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says the gospel of first importance, and he goes on to list those things. I just finished a book by Simon Gathercole, who's a European scholar who's brilliant, and he has a book called The Gospel and the Gospels. And he points out that the 4 Gospels we have, they all unpack the fact that Jesus is the Christ, he's the Messiah, that he died for our sins, that he was raised on the 3rd day, and this happened according to the Scriptures. So it has an interpretive context. When you look at the Gospels that are outside of the canonical Gospels, they're all doing something different. They're doing something different. And so that's one reason. Another is they're later.
Hold on. Can you give us what is an example of a gospel that's outside of the canon?
Yeah, sorry. Like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Peter.
Books or letters or books that didn't make the cut.
Yes. And they're
not inside your Bible.
Yes, there's reasons why they didn't make the cut. So that's just one of them. Like they're not actually giving the core of the gospel. But another is that they're written later, not within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. They're not written by an apostle or someone associated by the apostles. They may have an apostle's name, but Peter wasn't alive in the 2nd century and didn't write the Gospel of Peter, for example. The Gospel of Peter also has a talking cross. The Gospel of Thomas was never considered to be one of the 4. What's interesting actually is in around 150 AD, there's a famous Christian apologist named Justin Martyr, and he had a disciple named Tatian who wrote the Diatessaron, which was a harmonization of the 4 Gospels. Not the 6 or the 7 or the 8 Gospels, but the 4, because those 4 were immediately widely recognized as authoritative sources for the church. And there's also a whole role of the Holy Spirit we could talk about as well, but there's reasons why those others weren't included. The Gospel of Thomas, just for an example too of a different kind of teaching. At the very last saying, it's just a sayings document, by the way. There's no like narrative. It's just different sayings of Jesus. But the last one, Peter asks, how is Mary going to be saved? And Jesus' response is that Mary will be saved, or women will be saved if they make themselves like men, is my rough summary based off my memory here. But the point is, if a woman makes herself like a man, then she can be saved. We don't find that in Paul's teaching, like in Galatians, where there's neither male nor female, but we're all one in Christ, right? It's a little bit different. So
that's a good way to not get your letter included in the canon. Is say something wildly different from all the other ones.
Yes, exactly. So
why didn't I just concur?
He probably got some feedback on that one.
That's Gathercole's point. These other gospels are all doing just vastly different things, and so. Yeah, we could see what's
I want to do a podcast on the canon and how we got the Bible.
Well, that we've got. There's another Ben in Lynchburg, Ben Laird. He just wrote a book on it.
Really?
Yep. You should. I'll connect you guys.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would love that. I think this is a fascinating topic, and we had a guest on a couple weeks ago. The podcast hasn't come out yet, but we had a guest on who. Converted from, I think he was Methodist. He converted to Catholicism. So this one will be coming out pretty soon, and it's very interesting conversation. I really enjoyed talking with him. Great guy, all about the similarities and the differences between Protestants and Catholics, and the canon comes up. Right, and they've got a few different books.
They've got some additional Old Testament books.
In their Old Testament, but their New Testament's the same, right?
Yep.
And so very interesting there from how did we get this Bible that we all hold and buy on Amazon and read and call the Bible? How did we get this? How are some people's a little bit different than the others? But anyway, I think this is an important part of being an ambassador. of knowing if you're going to stake your entire life on this Jesus character, you got to understand what do we know about him and how do we know it?
Right,
and where did these writings come from and how are they reliable? And is there some source outside of the Bible that corroborates this? And this is what, your book, Trustworthy, is all about. And this is what it's addressing and helping men with. So such an important topic. Absolutely love it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just glad those are even with the canon discussion. I'm glad those are all Old Testament issues. I kind of joke and say that, but
hey, just for our listeners that may not be as well read as you guys,
when we do this.
we're not talking about canons like the Civil War type canons, right? What just elaborate on that for the listeners that may not know.
Yeah, good point. Canon just meant it's just another word for ruler or measuring stick or measuring rod that you would use to what is our standard? Because if I'm like, oh, it's a foot, it's just my arm length. Okay, well, I'm sure our arms are different sizes, right? So we need some sort of standard that's objective for all of us across the board.
The standard. I love that. That's a good way to define canon.
So, but that's what's good about Gladiator.
Gladiator. I actually thought we were talking about Civil War canons.
Yeah, that was good.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Man, so tell us, what are you up to right now? What's Ben Shaw doing now? You've already written this book. What are you working on? What's new for you?
I just yes, we're getting Core going. It's a new ministry, so we're doing a whole lot on that front. We're still doing fundraising and activity, which is tough because when you're doing one, you want to be doing the other. We're trying to still build up Core. We want to have 10,000 people come through our webinars within the next 4 years or so. So that's one of our goals, but that's going to take a lot, just from a infrastructure point of view.
Can you give us a quick idea? Give us just a couple of the titles. What are some of your webinars? What could our guys go there to get?
Right now, I'll give you two examples. We've got one right now going through Trustworthy, 6 weeks, every Sunday at 6. I'm discussing with a live group, like I said, from high school students to heart surgeons, and we're going through 2 arguments a week. New Testament reliability. So we meet together
every Sunday at 6 for 6 weeks.
Yep.
And you go through the book together.
Yep.
With the author.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
I don't know anywhere else you can do something like that.
How much does this cost if a guy wants to do this?
Right now it's $75 for the class.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to partner with churches and organizations because we're fundraising. So if they partner with us, we want them to get scholarships to the class that they can have their members or their whoever, maybe chaplains or something. They can come through the course, get equipped on all these details, and then go back and make disciples, like we were talking about at the very beginning. That's the whole point. We want to be able to multiply. And then we have one coming up on the resurrection. We'll be doing that again for 6 weeks. They're all 6 weeks long. They're all 1 hour length. We record them in case you're on vacation or something. But then there's Q&A at the end. And so the resurrection one will be starting the week after Easter. Traditionally Easter. Not
this is so awesome for Christians at any level, whether you're new to this or you've been doing this for decades and you need to kind of resharpen your steel a little bit. This is something we can get into, and we all need to be reading, be continually growing and learning. So the thing I like about this too is it's interactive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I don't do well when I buy a course and I got to read something and watch a video. I will tend to skip it or not do it, or it falls by the wayside. But if I know like it's a live call that I'm getting on, and there's other people on there that are stopping what they're doing right now, and they're taking their time to get on this call, it's a much higher priority, especially when it's the author of a book that I'm going through, and I'm like, I can get on a call and ask this guy a question about it. That's absolutely awesome.
Yeah,
I went through a course like that.
You did?
Yeah.
We also want to be like resources for people after. It's not like, hey, because one of the things Dr. Habermas instilled in us is he would go do events, but then like after that event, what further recourse do they have? Like nothing. So he's really ministry minded he tries to respond to emails. Sometimes he gets too many and he only types with 2 fingers. So it takes him a long
That's the
time
best
to
way.
respond.
He's typing 4,000
The
pages.
fastest 2-finger typer.
Or is
but
he
it's
just
still 2
talking to
fingers.
somebody? He needs to just be talking and somebody else types.
He's tried those softwares too. But so that was one of the reasons we made this class. We made these classes. We wanted it interactive. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, you got to have some rolling going on. It's better for the teacher, and because teaching even at university, you have to I took a 20-minute session on how to do attendance. We don't have to do attendance here. We just show up, we talk about the stuff we love talking about, and then we're equipping the church at the same. It's just so much better. People get black belts in jiu-jitsu. Not once is attendance taken. I've never taken attendance for a class, but you
That's
just
a
know
great
it because
point.
you talk to the person. You're he knows what he's talking about there. Let him go.
Yeah, you can grab somebody by the lapels,
He'll know.
and you can tell in a few seconds
Yeah.
where this guy's at.
Yeah,
And
you can
Yeah,
tell
if
too if they're a mechanic. That's usually one of the first things you can tell.
If you go to a school and they're like, "Hey, you've been here for 6 months. Here's your blue belt." That's not the school to be at.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is such a great analogy here. There's so many overlaps.
Yeah.
Man, so I'm excited. Tell us where can guys find the link? What's your website? Where can we find out about these core webinars?
Yeah, it's coreapologetics.com.
Coreapologetics.com.
Straightforward on that. Coreapologetics.com. They're called core classes now, but we're in the process of changing that because classes don't sound as cool as a webinar, so we're going to change it to webinars.
I agree. I like that.
Yeah.
Webinar draws me in.
That's my wife's idea, so I got to give her all the credit.
I'm telling you what, that's where all the good ideas are. And we just did a podcast earlier talking about the fact that if your wife is not supporting your ministry that you're doing, it's not going to go far.
It's hard, yeah.
If she's not on board supporting you, so that's how I know also that your ministry is going to go far. If your wife's naming things, you've got the right formula. And we're excited to have you at our national rally, May 2nd through 4th. Guys, listen to this. Get the book, Trustworthy. Read it and get your questions ready and bring them to the rally.
That's right.
Because Ben's going to be there. Ben, is there any way you can possibly kidnap or bribe or bring Dr. Habermas with you?
Oh, I wish.
I heard that he's into snakes.
He is. He loves snakes. If you guys
Can
said
we-
you had a snake expo going on there, that's probably.
I was going to say, if that's what it takes, we will get a snake expo there.
I'll get a reptile bus.
We got a reptile bus. Tell him. Seriously, we're like an hour and a half. We're 2 hours down the road from him, and
Yeah.
we'll get snakes. We're going to do whatever we can. We're going to talk more about this. We're going to look into this offline. We're going to get him there.
Yeah,
All right, closing.
He's hilarious on that.
He is a hoot, man. I've had the opportunity just to meet him briefly at some seminars and stuff, and the thing I like about him instantly is he's just like such an absolute down to earth dude.
Yeah.
Right, like you don't feel like you're talking to an academic. You know, he just talks to you and relates as soon as he walks off the stage, and you feel comfortable chatting with him.
Yeah.
The funny thing with him is, so there's pros and cons to having worked with him for over a decade, because his mind is so sharp. His prep for when he talks or gives a lecture, it's very minimal.
I bet.
Like very, very minimal. So I'm like, oh, this is just what everyone does. They just get up and go like him. And I'm like, oh, no, they don't.
I can totally see how that would be.
Yeah.
That would be the situation.
So
All
he
right,
talks
guys,
just
let's-
like that. It's great.
Let's do last rounds. All right, you first. We'll go Gladiator and then Ben. What have we not said that we need to?
Man, no, I want to point out thanking Dr. Habermas, and then you for what you're doing, because minimal facts for me was what changed my discipleship, going from how I became a Christian to why I'm a Christian, and I was able to articulate that because of the minimal facts. So knowing the difference between your testimony and your how, and then this is the why, and that gives me a leg to stand on. So just the importance of the minimal facts, man. And when you're discipling people, when you're sharing the gospel with people, like this is a amazing tool to utilize.
That's how it was for me. I remember distinctly having thoughts, well, Jesus rose from the dead, so I've got to account for that in my worldview. And I wasn't at the time.
Yeah.
Until I started going through the minimal facts. Like, oh, there's some things I've got to turn from, and there's some things I got to start doing. And so it worked very similarly for me. And that's what I love about it. And again, it's simple enough for someone who has got no background in a marketing degree, can just go and pick it up and then learn it.
Yeah, which I think there's an apologetic in that as well, is the accessibility of the gospel, right? It's like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, whether you're a fisherman or a shepherd or an academic, the gospel is easily understood. The situation that we are all sinners, we are all fallen. None of us is good enough to earn our salvation. And that means eternal separation from a perfect being, from God. It means, the penalty for sin is death. And we all know, I've never talked to anybody that argued that they were not a sinner. Everybody instantly knows, oh yeah, I've done plenty of wrong things, especially when you realize that Jesus said even thinking the wrong thing is the same as doing it. And so we all get this intuitively. We're fallen, we're broken, we're sinners, and the payment for that is eternal separation from God. And then when you hear the good news part of this, where God, the creator of the entire universe, came into his creation, entered earth, took on human form in the person of Jesus, and made that payment for each and every one of us on the cross. It's like, it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is or your level of education, you get it. I think it resonates. And Romans 1 tells us that everybody knows. Every single person knows in their heart that there's a God, and only a foolish person would deny that. And so I find it also, not only is it accessible, but it literally never gets old. Mm-hmm. Like, you can hear, I could go to a church where the pastor gave the gospel every single Sunday, and I would never get tired of that. I'm like, you don't even need to do anything different. Just give us the gospel every Sunday. It never gets old. It's new every time it hits my ears. And that's just part of the power of it. If there's anything in the world that's worth us investing our entire lives in, it's certainly this.
Yeah, that's good. It's just that's the thing, and we want to make sure we're not making it, as we talked about earlier, we're not specializing the gospel. It's
right.
for everybody, and everyone's sinned, everyone's fallen short. But the good news is we've got the gospel, that it wasn't anything we did. God did it for us. That's Ephesians 2, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
It's by faith, faithful obedience, allegiance to Jesus, and there's a reason for that. We just talked about what the gospel is: Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, according to the scriptures, and he's the Messiah. And that's nothing we did. I didn't come and die on a cross for anybody, and even if I did, that wouldn't have done anything for anybody. But that's the good news we find in Ephesians 2, 8, 9. But then verse 10 says, okay, now we've got something to do. Because we're created in Christ Jesus for good works that God prepared beforehand for us to walk in. So now we need to have our minds renewed daily and have our eyes open to those good works he's prepared beforehand for us to walk in, and that we should do that.
Let's do it. I'm pumped. Thanks, Ben Shaw, for being here on the Men's Alliance podcast, and we can't wait to see you and meet you in person in just a couple weeks, May 2nd through 4th. Guys, listen, if you haven't got your tickets yet to the national rally, go to our website, men'salliancetribe.com. Get your tickets, bring your tribe, road trip to the rally, bring a tent, bring a grill. We got food trucks. It's going to be a tailgating atmosphere of working out, flipping tires, having great conversations around fires, listening to world-class speakers, and just a lot of iron sharpening iron. So go to our website and check that out. And Ben will be there. We'll get him. We'll talk him into bringing some copies of his book and signing them for us too.
Yeah, we'll be doing some jiu-jitsu. I think we're going to do some guillotine moves.
And bring your gis, bring your little no-gi tight shirts.
Gladiator's got a whole plan for grappling out there too, which I can't wait to be a part of. I can't wait to get choked out by both of you. It'll be an honor and a privilege, and we'll get it on video.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
All right. See you, Ben.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much.
Hey, guys, listen up. I've got huge news. This coming May 2nd through 4th, we are having our first ever Men's Alliance National Rally. This is going to be the biggest, greatest gathering of barbarian ambassadors from every tribe all over the country coming together for one weekend in a state park. You can come camp out or you can stay in a local hotel, but it is going to be an incredible time. We want every tribe across the country to road trip to this rally. We are bringing you the absolute best speakers in the country. Greg Kokel, author of Tactics, founder of Stand to Reason. He will be a headlining speaker along with Stephen Mansfield, New York Times bestselling author of Band of Brothers, which has helped me start Men's Alliance. He's also the author of Men on Fire. We're going to have Pastor Brian Hughes from Passion Community Church there leading us on Sunday morning worship service outdoors. It's going to be incredible. We're going to have the Barbarian Games at the rally Friday night with live metal music performed by Saved by Scarlet. Then Saturday morning is the first national all tribes. It's going to be epic. Go to our website, click on National Rally, get your tickets. It's going to fill up. It's going to be a great time of outdoor camping, music, workouts, speakers, and sharpening one another. Don't miss the rally. To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.